So we are concluding chapter 7, and it deals with conclusions. The previous video dealt with introductions, and introductions are very important, and we should spend significant time on the conclusion as well. The conclusion wraps up your presentation, and how you end is almost as important as how you begin. So introductions and conclusions really are probably the things that the audience might remember the most, how you began and how you ended. Your conclusion supports the body of your speech. It reinforces your message and it brings your speech to a close. So somebody asked somebody how to give a good presentation and they said, well, tell them what you're going to tell them and then tell them and then tell them what you told them. The conclusion is you telling them what you told them. A conclusion should not be an afterthought. Okay, so I have to have a conclusion. What do I do? No, you need to understand that this is your last opportunity to make an impact with your audience. So what you say at the end certainly is very important. So what are the functions of a conclusion? A conclusion allows you to summarize important information. The transition from the body to the conclusion is significant, and usually what provides that transition is a signal, a verbal signal, and that verbal signal may be finally, in conclusion, to sum it all up, something to that effect that signals to the audience, you're about to land this plane, you're near the end, so you need a way to say that without it seeming awkward. It also allows you to motivate your listeners. Again, relating your topic to your listeners, this is where you focus in again, just like you did at the very beginning in the introduction with the reason to listen. So now, you also want to hone in on what you want your audience to do, so you motivate them. The end of your presentation communicates a feeling or an emotion or a mood, you might say, a psychological mood that the listeners will carry with them as they leave. And then lastly, it allows you to broaden your audience from this particular topic to how this principle, this idea impacts other topics and ideas, okay? You can make a direct appeal to your listeners by urging them to take specific action. And you do want that, even in an informative speech. It doesn't have to be only for a persuasive speech. And this is also where you hone in on them changing their attitudes in some way. And then lastly, it creates closure, a sense of satisfaction, a sense that you've dealt with the presentation. It's been in-depth. It meets the expectations of the audience. Ending with a dramatic story, a humor, or quotation, you can certainly do that. In fact, any of the ways that you began the presentation, as we talked about attention getters, you can sometimes use at the end in the conclusion, but it serves a different purpose now. It serves the purpose of bringing the presentation to a close, creating closure. So how do you go about developing memorable conclusions? Well, think of it as a transition. So you might say, thank you for inviting me. And that signals to the audience that this is functioning like a brake light, like finally in conclusion to sum it all up. As you wrap up your speech, certainly making a direct appeal is one way of doing that, asking them to take specific action or change attitudes, as I've just said. Using a dramatic illustration, that would work, a story. It helps to reinforce the theme. It's this last story is what they will take with them. It will more than likely be remembered. Conclude with a quotation. Those usually work very well. Maybe a metaphor that broadens the meaning of your speech, or maybe a joke at the end that wraps everything up. But make sure the joke relates to your topic. What are some common pitfalls of conclusions? Well, don't use your conclusion to introduce a new topic. In fact, you shouldn't introduce any new information in the conclusion at all. So your information, anything you wanted the audience to have, should have been in the body of the presentation. Don't apologize. If you're unhappy with the way the speech went, or with your performance, don't apologize. You draw more attention to it and to yourself, and it's uncomfortable for both you and the audience. Don't end abruptly. Don't say, that's all that I have, that's it. You need to let the audience know that you are landing this plane. Just like a pilot comes on board, when you're about to land, he'll say, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the process of landing. We are close to the airport and we're going to land, so please buckle up your seatbelts. Don't change the mood or tone now in the conclusion. You want to maintain the same mood that you began in the introduction, carried through the body, and as you land the plane, as you land the speech, in the speech, don't change the mood or tone. All right, and don't use too many. In fact, you need to use one in summary or one in conclusion. So don't use the language of summary or in conclusion unless you are actually at the end of your presentation. Don't ask for questions. All right, complete your entire conclusion. Once everything is done, then create a separate time for questions and answers. And be careful. If it's still part of your speech, people might take over the presentation, so be careful with that. Don't ignore applause. Graciously accept and thank the audience for the applause. And finally, don't forget to thank your audience and especially your host, the person who's invited you. A sincere thanks that's offered goes a long way. Don't run away. Just as you went to the podium in a very confident, poised manner, so you leave in the same way. Don't retreat from the podium. And don't read your conclusion, just like your introduction. It needs to be spoken eye to eye, strong eye contact, and it will reinforce your credibility. All right, that's the essence of conclusions then, and chapter 7.